weeknights at 7 on MSNBC.
My single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent. Direct voting by mail. While he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. Joe Biden is finally doing what we all should have been doing all along, taking Donald Trump literally. Donald Trump, who has made no attempt to steal the upcoming election in the dark of night, he has urged his supporters in North Carolina to commit felony voter fraud by voting twice. Donald Trump, who on Friday told Jeanine Pirro he will use the Insurrection Act. Donald Trump, who used the military and federal law enforcement to clear mostly peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square outside the White House, has shown a willingness to use the military on his perceived political opponents. And he's got Bill Barr, who has shown a willingness to bend the rule of law around Donald Trump's crude and extrajudicial whims. So Joe Biden is traveling the only path available to him, preparing for a legal showdown, the likes of which this country has never seen before. From the Associated Press reporting on that effort, quote, Trump in recent months has sought to preemptively cast doubt on the election, warning that the expected surge in mail-in ballots because of the coronavirus pandemic will lead to massive fraud and could open the door to foreign countries to print their own fraudulent ballots. There's zero evidence of this happening, and the AP quotes Bob Bauer, a senior advisor to the Biden campaign, as saying, quote, notwithstanding Donald Trump and his Republican allies' hollow threats and constant misinformation, election officials around the country are working tirelessly to hold a free and fair election, and we have an extraordinary national team in place to ensure that every eligible voter is able to exercise their right to vote and to have their vote counted. This is the kind of effort that Americans in both political parties used to undertake in emerging democracies, far away. But it's now necessary here in America because the current president has done so much damage to our democracy that he has literally called into suspicion the result of an election that hasn't happened yet. As New York Times columnist Jamal Bowie puts it in a new column, quote, Trump would like to obtain a proper victory, but it's clear he's not counting on it. That is why the most visible aspect of Trump's campaign for continued power is his attack on the election itself. If he doesn't win, he says again and again, then the outcome isn't legitimate. Joining our conversation, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, plus professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University and a contributor for the Grio, our friend Jason Johnson's back, and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance is here. So, hanging a lantern around my own history, I was part of the 2000 Florida recount, Jonathan Lemire, but it sounds like what Trump is waging and what Democrats are preparing for is a national effort to demand recounts, to legally challenge absentee ballots, to go looking for other ballots in states where he's close. How much of this is operationalized, Jonathan Lemire, underneath Donald Trump's public utterances?
We all, of course, remember, Nicole, the drama that unfolded day to day in 2000 in just the recount in one state. And it won't be 50, but we may be looking at quite a few this November across all the battlegrounds and even some states that might just lean one way or the other right now in those polls. And this is a coordinated all-out assault from the president. And he's ratcheted up his rhetoric on this idea, this unfounded idea, that the election will be rigged and the Democrats are trying to steal it with their mail-in voting. I traveled with him this weekend, and Saturday night in particular, in a small town outside of Reno where he had a rally in Nevada, he hammered this home, basically saying that the only way, he said, the Democrats could win this election would be if they rig it. He went on a long screed against the governor of the state, one that he blamed for not letting him have the rallies where he wanted, and I should note, which led him to having an indoor rally Sunday night just outside of Las Vegas, one that we will probably, in the weeks ahead, be watching carefully to see if that was indeed a super spreader event for COVID-19, but suggesting that this man, the governor, was so biased in his efforts to prevent the president from campaigning. Therefore, he shouldn't be trusted to oversee the largely mail-in balloting in that state. And we have heard him make this refrain over and over, as of course, so many states are turning to mail-in voting this time around amid the pandemic. North Carolina, because it was the first battleground to embark in early voting, has received more attention from the president, but there are plenty of others, and they are indeed, as much as the Biden camp is ramping up their legal team and prepared for challenges to try to safeguard voters' ability to cast their ballots. The president and his campaign are doing the same. And they will have also an army of lawyers ready to perhaps defend ballots, but also to challenge them. And we may be indeed looking for a very messy and protracted, not election night, but election weeks that begin in early November.
I want to read this to you, Joyce fans, because I don't want to play it. I'm already anxious about amplifying these lies. So this is just a sampling of what Donald Trump has been saying. This will be, in my opinion, the most corrupt election in the history of our country. August 17th in Wisconsin. The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. September 8th in North Carolina. Be poll watchers when you go there. Watch all the thieving and stealing and robbing they do. September 12th in Nevada. The Democrats are trying to rig this election because it's the only way they're going to win. September 15th on his favorite show, Fox and Friends. You're going to see something with these ballots. You're going to see corruption like you've never seen. You're going to see a rigged election. Joyce Vance, Ben Ginsburg, who is a longtime Republican campaign lawyer and election expert, was out with an op-ed last week. We were happy to have him here when he says that widespread election fraud isn't a thing. James Baker and Jimmy Carter looked at it after that 2000 Florida recount and found that widespread voter fraud, rigged elections are mercifully, and until Donald Trump, not a thing in this country. What is a thing, what is a crisis, is disinformation and misinformation and siloed chains of sort of information ecosystems. This is just a sampling we found today. Donald Trump has been hardwiring his base of supporters to believe that the outcome of the election will not be legitimate for many, many months. What is the antidote to that?
You know, the antidote is early vaccination with the facts. For starters, Nicole, it's very telling that Trump says he won't believe in the results of the election if he loses. He's not making a pitch that there's a fraud problem with the election. He's simply saying that he's a sore loser and that if he doesn't win, he wants all of his followers to refuse to believe in the results of the election. So what are the facts that we should be looking at? In 2017, Trump created a commission that was searching for voter fraud. And that commission had to fold because they simply couldn't find any significant voter fraud. In 2016, 1 in 4 ballots in this country were cast by mail. There were not systemic problems with fraud. Our military, our service members overseas and their families, they vote by mail. There is no evidence of fraud. This is simply another example of the president engaging in projection and in outright lying about what elections look like and how they're held. Americans can have confidence that this election can be held fairly, that they can have confidence in the results. But the important thing now is to counteract, as you point out correctly, the president's fake narrative, to not give it any additional life, and to always introduce the evidence, the fact that fraud doesn't exist, that it's not a problem when Trump tries to complain about election results before they take place.
You know, and Jason Johnson, they have tied the election result to violence. I mean, 2 of Donald Trump's closest allies, Mark Caputo, who's going through something, emotional or psychological, it would appear, based on the New York Times reporting of his public statements, told people to arm themselves and get ready after the election. And Roger Stone, and again, I'm reluctant to play this, but Roger Stone is talking to Alex Jones of the Sandy Hook hoax scandal, for which he was sued, about Donald Trump declaring martial law. These are comments that are so, they're wacky, but they've got the power of the president behind him because they're 2 of his closest allies. Jason, we're going to fix your audio, but I'm going to take that to you, Jonathan Lemire. I mean, how often do Donald Trump's allies, who all had to lawyer up to sort of wade through the legal morass that was the Mueller probe, both Mr. Stone and Mr. Caputo, how often do they go rogue? I mean, it's clear that they're calling for violence in a way that Donald Trump is entirely comfortable with. Has anyone sought to hold him accountable or warn him against doing that?
Nicole, we're in a new place here. I don't think there's any question of that. These are indeed, as you say, close political allies, confidants of the president. Perhaps not as tight as they used to be. They're sort of members of the original campaign back in 2015. But certainly people, as we know, the president, of course, commuted Roger Stone's sentence just a few months ago. This is someone who is still very much in his orbit, who goes to bat for the president, and maybe at times can be a half step ahead of where the president wants to be, but usually not too far. And I think we are seeing here, it is all part of this larger package here. It's sowing doubt on the election results. It's suggesting that America should have a winner that night. And let's take a minute and pause on that for a second. That, of course, we know that because so many states are going to be doing mail-in voting, it will take longer to count those results. And that the ballots that are cast in person on Election Day will be done quicker. Now, the president, of course, is urging Republicans, urging his voters to go to the polls that day, while Democrats, out of concern for health, are urging mail-in balloting. So therefore, there's a real scenario where on election night, Donald Trump, as the East Coast or even the West Coast goes to bed and we don't have a definitive result, Donald Trump will be winning. And there's a chance, and the Democrats and the Biden campaign are worried about this, that he may therefore declare victory, prematurely declare victory, before any other organization, including the Associated Press, would do so, and therefore try to delegitimize any ballot that comes in after that, suggesting that these mail-in ballots are fraudulent. And I think that is part of why there is such concern. We've heard these think tanks try to game out scenarios as to what can happen after the election. And outside of a Biden landslide, there's a belief that there could be the real potential for some violence in the streets afterwards. We certainly hope not. But it goes to show that the president and some of his closest political allies are stoking that talk. And that's something that not just Democrats, but all of us should be concerned about.
Jason Johnson, I want to come back to the question I asked you about, because Donald Trump has made law and order and lawlessness a central campaign issue, and he has sought unsuccessfully, if you accept the public polls that are out this week, to depict a future America run by Joe Biden as the threat. It is the current America run by Donald Trump that is the threat, and it is Donald Trump and his closest communications allies who are stoking violence. I wonder, my question was to get you on the record of whether we're paying close enough attention and whether we're fortifying ourselves and whether we are, maybe for the last and final time, right to sort of call out for a guardrail or for someone to say, listen, Donald Trump's going to delegitimize the election. He's going to say reckless things. He's going to urge his voters to commit felony voter fraud. But there should be a bright red line at inciting violence.
Nicole, I agree. And I've been saying this, and you've given me the space to say this on the show. I don't think Donald Trump is running a re-election campaign. He's just trying to consolidate power. There's no campaign here, right? They're not spending money. What he did in Kenosha, what he's done in Portland is basically ask terrorists to come and intimidate people. And that's what he's going to do on Election Day. I said it's like season 5 of House of Cards. He's going to say, oh, there's terrorist action in Ohio. I got to send troops there. Hey, you got to go down to Dade County with your guns, Proud Boys, and intimidate people. That is what the president is trying to do. The only guardrail that we have, besides talking in the press about, hey, look, this guy is just trying to consolidate power, he's trying to end democratic elections, is that it seems like the Biden campaign is not going to be caught flat-footed. No insult, but Joe Biden is not Al Gore. He is not John Kerry. He's not going to roll over when he sees a problem. And I just had a friend contact me about this. He said this popped up on his LinkedIn. They're hiring post-election lawyers for Iowa now. They're hiring post-election. So Biden's team is already getting people in place because they're anticipating a battle, and that's a good sign rather than being caught flat-footed after November 3rd.
Jason, I want to read this to you. Greg Sargent of the Washington Post writes this, quote, Trump isn't trying to persuade a majority of U.S. voters to support him. to your point. Instead, he's trying to get within what you might call cheating distance of pulling another electoral college inside straight, even while losing the popular vote, just like last time. And he's not there yet. But many top Trump officials and congressional allies have placed their official duties and the levers of your government at the disposal of Trump's re-election effort, which depends on closing that gap. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree. And this is one of the many scenarios that I've seen gamed out that I've thought about. Let's say Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania come down to a situation where votes that come in after Election Day give those states to Joe Biden, but the votes that came in on Election Day give those states to Trump. What will the Supreme Court do? What will state Supreme Courts do? That's what Donald Trump wants to have happen. He knows he can't win the Electoral College or even the popular vote by people being able to vote. He wants to throw it to the courts. And I think that even the courts, as conservative as they may be willing to flip one state. They can flip a Florida. They can flip a Michigan. But if you have 2 or 3 different states where the vote count shows, look, these additional mail-in ballots will make a difference and they will throw it from one person to another, I think even our conservative Supreme Court would have trouble overruling public sentiment that way. I hope.
Joyce, I hope too. Joyce, I want to read you something. Our friend Matt Miller has this expression that he mostly shares off air, but I don't think he'll mind if I say this, that for a while, the first couple of years when Democrats would say, oh, but the norms, you know, it started to sound a little fussy. But here's what happens when norms are obliterated. This is Greg Sargent's reporting on all the ways that Trump has used the levers of power to his political advantage. Rushing coronavirus treatments and pushing unproven treatments and a vaccine before Election Day, interfering in public health messaging, his HHS changing reports to align with the president's message, twisting intelligence to support campaign propaganda, downplaying the role of white supremacy, raising the profile of left-wing groups, helping to cast doubt on Russian election sabotage, Barr's efforts here to release some Durham report, which resulted in the resignation of his top deputy, limiting the disclosure of knowledge of Russian sabotage, discrediting vote by mail, validating fake narratives about Hunter Biden. And I would just add to this list, Joyce, because this is the kind of list that I print out and that keeps me up at night, the ongoing efforts to sort of make China and Iran's preference for Joe Biden look the same as the Russians' actions, which are to meddle in our election, another attack on our democracy, which is wholly different in the eyes of the ODNI's report on election interference for 2020. What do you make of our inability 4 years in to have adapted and pushed back any of these entreaties on critical national security, homeland security agencies that are now, as Greg Sargent accurately reports, being used to Donald Trump's political benefit?
The eternal mystery of this administration is how Trump has gotten away with busting norms so easily, so effortlessly, and with no meaningful checks. And I suppose one of the biggest answers to that is the failure of the Senate majority to hold him accountable, which is the constitutional task that they're given. I think the good news on the horizon here is that unlike Bush versus Gore, when Democrats had to jump into litigation after the election, completely unprepared, frankly, and unorganized in the face of very serious issues, that's not what the Biden team will look like after this election. So this is maybe the frontier on norms that can be violated. They've assembled a really outstanding team of lawyers. It is headed by 2 former solicitors general. Former Attorney General Eric Holder is involved to coordinate with some of the civil rights groups and others who are already engaged in litigation. They will game out the scenarios in advance, and they will be prepared in court. And I agree with Jason's assessment that the courts will not do gross injustice. You know, it's possible that a case here or there could be decided in a way that I might view as being wrong. But when we're looking at oppressive litigation across the country, in the face of what can only be seen as a really sustained effort to interfere with the election, I do believe that the courts will hold and that we will have fair and free elections, even if we have to wait a while to get results, something that we should all be prepared for.
Joyce Vance, Jason Johnson, Jonathan Lemire, all 3 of you providing me with my much-needed dose of optimism, and Jonathan Lemire, in your case, a call for patience. Thank you for that. When we return,